Rebecca had always been the type of person who planned everything. Every morning started the same way. Wake up at 6:30, shower, coffee, dress in one of her 5 work suits, and catch the 7:45 train into the city. For 3 years, this had been her life. Day after day, the same routine. She worked as an accountant at a mid-sized firm downtown, crunching numbers and building spreadsheets that somehow never seemed to end. On paper, everything looked fine. She had a decent apartment, a steady paycheck, and her parents were proud. But if anyone had asked her when she last felt truly happy, she wouldn't have known what to say. Somewhere along the way, life had become something she just got through rather than something she actually lived. It was a Tuesday in February when everything changed. Not a special Tuesday. Just another cold gray evening in Chicago. The kind of cold that cuts right through your coat and makes you want to run everywhere just to get inside faster. Rebecca had stayed late at the office again, trying to finish a project that her boss needed by morning. By the time she packed up her bag and headed out, it was already dark. The train station was crowded as usual. Hundreds of people rushing in different directions, everyone in their own world, staring at phones or lost in thought. Rebecca was thinking about the frozen dinner waiting in her freezer and whether she had the energy to even heat it up. She was so tired. Not just physically tired, but the kind of tired that sits deep in your bones and makes everything feel heavy. She was walking fast, weaving through the crowd, when something made her look to the right. On one of the wooden benches near the platform, an elderly woman sat alone. Her shoulders were shaking and her face was buried in her hands. She was crying. Not loud, dramatic crying, but the quiet kind that somehow feels even sadder. Rebecca slowed down. Around her, dozens of people walked past without even glancing at the woman. Everyone was in such a hurry. She understood that feeling. She had somewhere to be too. Her train was leaving in 8 minutes. If she missed it, she'd have to wait another 30 minutes in the cold station, but something wouldn't let her keep walking. Maybe it was the way the woman looked so small and alone. Maybe it was because Rebecca herself had felt invisible lately, and she knew how that felt. Whatever it was, she found herself stopping and turning back. She walked over slowly, not wanting to startle the woman. When she got close, she could see the woman was probably in her 70s, with white hair pulled back in a loose bun. She wore a dark blue coat that had seen better days, and her hands trembled as she held a crumpled tissue. Rebecca stood there for a moment, unsure what to say. Then she spoke softly. "Excuse me, are you all right? Can I help you with something?" The woman looked up, surprised that anyone had stopped. Her eyes were red from crying, and there was a look of exhaustion on her face that Rebecca recognized all too well. "Oh," the woman said, her voice shaky. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to make a scene." Rebecca sat down on the bench beside her, setting her work bag on the ground. "You're not making a scene, but you seem upset. Is everything okay?" The woman took a deep breath, trying to compose herself. I just got released from the hospital this afternoon. I had a heart attack last week." Rebecca felt her chest tighten. "Oh my goodness. Are you okay? Should you even be traveling alone right now?" The woman gave a sad smile. "The doctor said I'm stable enough to go home, but I don't have anyone to pick me up. My daughter lives in California, and my son is overseas with the military. I called a couple of friends, but everyone's busy. I know I should just take a cab, but honestly," her voice cracked, "I'm scared to go home to an empty apartment. I keep thinking about what would have happened if I'd been alone when the heart attack happened." Rebecca felt something crack open inside her. Here was this woman who had just survived something terrifying, and she was all alone in a crowded train station. No one to call, no one to lean on. It felt wrong in a way that made Rebecca's heart ache. "What's your name?" Rebecca asked gently. "Dorothy," the woman said. "Dorothy Chen. I'm Rebecca. And listen, Dorothy, you're not going to go home alone. Not today. Let me help you." Dorothy looked at her with surprise. "Oh no, I couldn't ask you to do that. You have your own life. You don't need to worry about a silly old woman." "You're not silly," Rebecca said firmly, "and I'm not letting you go through this alone." "Where do you live?" Dorothy hesitated, then told her the address. It was about 20 minutes from the station by car. Rebecca pulled out her phone and opened a ride-sharing app. She ordered a car, selecting the option for the most comfortable vehicle available. "The car will be here in 5 minutes," Rebecca said. "I'm going to ride with you to make sure you get home safely." "But your train," Dorothy protested. Won't you miss it? Rebecca looked at the departure board. Her train was now leaving in 2 minutes. She watched as her usual train pulled away from the platform. For some reason, she didn't feel the usual panic of missing her routine. Instead, she felt something else, something that almost felt like relief. There'll be another train, Rebecca said. Right now you need someone. So I'm here. Dorothy's eyes filled with fresh tears, but this time they looked different. I don't know what to say. People don't do things like this anymore. Well, maybe they should, Rebecca said. When the car arrived, Rebecca helped Dorothy gather her small bag of belongings from the hospital. They settled into the back seat, and as they drove through the city streets, Dorothy began to talk. She told Rebecca about her life, about teaching art for 40 years at a local high school, about losing her husband 5 years ago, about how the days sometimes felt so long and empty that she wasn't sure what she was still doing here. Rebecca listened, really listened, in a way she hadn't listened to anyone in a long time. She wasn't thinking about work or her to-do list. She was just present, there with this woman who needed someone to care. When they arrived at Dorothy's building, Rebecca insisted on walking her up to her apartment. It was a small place on the 3rd floor, and Dorothy moved slowly up the stairs, still weak from her hospital stay. Rebecca stayed close, ready to help if needed. Inside the apartment, Rebecca's breath caught. Every single wall was covered with paintings. Colorful, vibrant, emotional pieces that seemed to pulse with life. Landscapes, portraits, abstract swirls of color. They were everywhere. Did you do all of these? Rebecca asked, amazed. Dorothy nodded, a small smile crossing her face for the first time. Art was my life. Still is, I suppose. It's the one thing that makes me feel alive. They talked for another hour. Rebecca made Dorothy some tea, checked that she had groceries, and programmed her number into Dorothy's phone. I want you to call me if you need anything, Rebecca said. I mean it. Anything at all. Dorothy squeezed her hand. You have no idea what you've done for me tonight. Thank you. As Rebecca finally made her way back to the station to catch a later train, something felt different. The world looked the same. Same gray sky, same cold wind, same crowded streets. But inside, something had shifted. For the first time in 3 years, she felt like she'd done something that actually mattered. She didn't know it yet, but that moment would change everything. Rebecca couldn't stop thinking about Dorothy. The next day at work, while her computer screen filled with numbers and spreadsheets, her mind kept drifting back to that small apartment covered in paintings. She kept seeing Dorothy's face the way it had lit up when she talked about art, even after everything she'd been through. During her lunch break, Rebecca sent a text to check in. Dorothy replied almost immediately, thanking her again and saying she was resting. They texted back and forth a bit. Just simple conversation, but it made Rebecca smile in a way that surprised her. When was the last time she'd smiled at work? That weekend, Rebecca found herself buying groceries and heading to Dorothy's apartment. She told herself it was just to check in, make sure the older woman had everything she needed. But truthfully, she wanted to go. She wanted to see those paintings again. She wanted to talk to someone who seemed to actually care about living, not just surviving. Dorothy opened the door with a genuine smile. She looked better than she had at the train station, less pale and shaky. Rebecca! I didn't expect to see you again so soon. Come in, come in. They spent the afternoon together. Rebecca helped put away groceries, and they talked about everything and nothing. Dorothy showed her more of her artwork, explaining the stories behind different pieces. There was a painting of a sunset that she'd done the day after her husband died. A portrait of her children when they were young. A wild, chaotic piece she'd created during a particularly difficult year of teaching. Art saved me, Dorothy said quietly, standing in front of a painting of a stormy ocean. Every time life got hard, I could paint. I could take all those feelings that I didn't know what to do with and put them on canvas. It was like magic. Still is. Rebecca found herself telling Dorothy things she hadn't told anyone, about how lost she felt at work, about how every day felt the same, about how she'd once had dreams of doing something meaningful with her life. But somewhere along the way, she'd just settled for safe and stable. And are you happy? Dorothy asked, looking at her with those knowing eyes. Rebecca opened her mouth to say yes, the automatic response she gave everyone. But something about Dorothy made her pause. No, she admitted. I'm not. I don't even remember the last time I felt happy. Dorothy nodded slowly. I see that weight on you. I've seen it before. Life has a way of crushing us if we let it. As the weeks went by, Rebecca's visits became regular. Every Saturday, sometimes Wednesday evenings too. It started as welfare checks, making sure Dorothy was recovering, helping with shopping or cleaning. But it became so much more than that. It became the part of Rebecca's week that she actually looked forward to. Dorothy told stories about her years teaching art to teenagers, about students who came in broken and left with a spark in their eyes, about how art could reach people when words failed. She talked about color theory and brush techniques with the same passion that other people talked about their children or their dreams. One Saturday, Dorothy was working on a new painting when Rebecca arrived. It was a sunrise done in brilliant oranges and pinks that seemed to glow on the canvas. Rebecca stood watching, mesmerized by the way Dorothy's brush moved with such confidence and grace. "Have you ever tried painting?" Dorothy asked, not looking up from her work. "Me? No, I'm not artistic at all. I can barely draw stick figures." Dorothy finally looked at her, a slight smile on her face. That's what everyone says before they try. Art isn't about being good. It's about expressing what's inside. You don't need talent for that. You just need honesty. Rebecca laughed, shaking her head. "I wouldn't even know where to start. Plus, I barely have time for sleep these days, much less a hobby." But Dorothy didn't push. She just went back to her painting, humming softly to herself. The next week, when Rebecca arrived, Dorothy had set up a second easel. There was a blank canvas, a palette of paints, and several brushes laid out neatly on a small table. "What's this?" Rebecca asked. "I thought maybe you'd like to try," Dorothy said casually. "No pressure. But I'm painting anyway, and I thought it might be nice to have company." Rebecca wanted to refuse. She had a million excuses ready, but looking at Dorothy's hopeful face, she couldn't bring herself to say no. "Okay," she heard herself say, "but don't expect anything good." "I expect nothing except that you show up honestly," Dorothy said. That first time was awkward. Rebecca stood in front of the blank canvas for what felt like forever, brush in hand, having no idea what to do. Dorothy was painting her own piece nearby, occasionally offering gentle suggestions, but mostly letting Rebecca figure it out. "Stop thinking so much," Dorothy said at one point. "Just feel. What color do you want to use right now?" Rebecca looked at the palette. Blue, deep dark blue. She dipped her brush and made a stroke across the canvas. It looked terrible, clumsy, like a child had done it. But something about the act of moving the brush, seeing the color spread across the white canvas, felt strangely satisfying. She kept going. Blue turned to purple, purple to black, black to a deep red. She had no plan, no vision. She was just moving the brush, mixing colors, seeing what happened. An hour passed like minutes. When she finally stepped back, she looked at what she'd created. It was messy and probably objectively bad, but it was hers. And more importantly, for that hour, she hadn't thought about work once. She hadn't worried about deadlines or spreadsheets or anything except the paint and the canvas. "How do you feel?" Dorothy asked. Rebecca thought about it. "Light," she said finally. "I feel lighter," Dorothy smiled. That's art. After that, painting became part of their routine. Rebecca would show up on Saturdays and they'd paint together for hours. Sometimes they talked, sometimes they worked in comfortable silence. Dorothy never criticized or judged. She just encouraged Rebecca to be honest with the canvas. Something started to shift in Rebecca. At work, her colleagues began commenting that she seemed different. More present, more engaged. Her friend Lisa from accounting asked if she'd started dating someone because she seemed happier. But the truth was more complicated than that. The painting was opening something in Rebecca that had been locked away for years. Every time she stood in front of that canvas, colors appearing under her brush, she felt more alive than she had in her entire adult life. It was like finding a part of herself she didn't know existed. 3 months into their routine, Rebecca brought one of her paintings home for the first time. It was a piece she'd done of a bird in a cage, but the door was open. She hung it in her bedroom and found herself staring at it before bed. That's when the questions started coming. What was she doing with her life? Why was she spending 40 hours a week doing work that drained her soul? When had she given up on the version of herself that had dreams and hopes? She tried to push the thoughts away. She had bills to pay, responsibilities. You couldn't just throw away a stable job because you enjoyed painting on weekends. That was crazy, childish, irresponsible. But the thoughts wouldn't leave. They grew louder every day. Every morning when her alarm went off, she felt the weight settling back on her chest. Every evening when she left the office, she counted down the days until Saturday when she could paint again. One evening, after a particularly long day at work, Rebecca sat in Dorothy's apartment staring at a half-finished painting. She'd been working on it for weeks, a landscape of a path leading into a forest. She couldn't get the light right. It was frustrating her. "What's wrong?" Dorothy asked, sensing her mood. "I don't know," Rebecca said. "I can't make this work. Maybe I'm just not good enough." Dorothy came over and looked at the painting. "This isn't about the painting," she said gently. "What's really bothering you?" And suddenly Rebecca was crying. She couldn't stop it. All the frustration and confusion and fear came pouring out. "I don't know what I'm doing with my life," she sobbed. "I hate my job. I wake up every day and feel like I'm dying a little bit, but I don't know what else to do. I can't just quit." "That's not how life works." Dorothy handed her a tissue and sat down beside her. For a long moment she was quiet. Then she spoke, her voice soft but firm. "Can I tell you something I've never told many people?" Rebecca nodded, wiping her eyes. "When I was your age, I wanted to be a real artist. Not a teacher, but an artist. I wanted to move to New York, rent a tiny studio, and just paint all day. I had the chance. A friend offered me a place to stay, but I was scared. What if I failed? What if I couldn't make money? What if everyone was right that art wasn't a real career?" She paused, her eyes distant. "So I took the teaching job instead. It was safe, stable. And I told myself I could still paint in my free time, that it would be enough. And teaching was good. I helped a lot of kids. I don't regret that. But," Rebecca prompted, "but I always wondered, what if I'd tried? What if I'd been brave enough to follow that dream? Now I'm 73 years old and I'll never know." That's the thing about safe choices. They keep you comfortable, but they also keep you from knowing who you could have been. Rebecca felt something crack open inside her chest. Dorothy took her hand. "I see something in you, Rebecca. A light that's trying to break through. Don't make the same mistake I did. Don't wake up at 70 and wonder what if." That night, lying in bed, Rebecca couldn't sleep. Dorothy's words kept echoing in her mind. Don't wake up at 70 and wonder what if. Rebecca couldn't get Dorothy's words out of her head. For days, they played on repeat every time she sat at her desk, every time she opened another spreadsheet, every time her boss asked her to stay late for a project that didn't matter to anyone except some client she'd never met. Don't wake up at 70 and wonder what if. She started having trouble sleeping. At 3 in the morning, she'd lie awake staring at the ceiling, her mind racing. What was she so afraid of? Why was the idea of change so terrifying? Other people took risks all the time. Other people followed their dreams. Why couldn't she? But then morning would come, and she'd get dressed in her work clothes and go through the motions, and the fear would settle back in. Because it wasn't just fear of failure. It was fear of disappointing everyone. Her parents, who were so proud of her stable career. Her friends who'd think she was crazy. Even herself. The version of herself who'd worked so hard to build this safe, predictable life. One Saturday morning, Rebecca arrived at Dorothy's apartment to find the older woman moving slower than usual. She looked tired in a way that worried Rebecca. "Are you feeling okay?" Rebecca asked, helping her settle into her favorite chair. "Just my heart acting up a bit," Dorothy said, waving it off. "Getting old isn't for the weak, I'll tell you that." Rebecca made them both tea, and they sat together in the living room surrounded by Dorothy's paintings. The light coming through the window made the colors seem even more alive. "Can I ask you something?" Rebecca said after a while. "Do you ever regret it? Choosing teaching instead of trying to be an artist?" Dorothy thought about it for a long time. Regret is a complicated word. I loved teaching. I changed lives. Some of my students went on to become artists themselves, and knowing I helped plant that seed, that means something. She paused, taking a sip of her tea. But if I'm being completely honest, yes, there's a part of me that will always wonder. Not because teaching was wrong, but because I chose it. Out of fear rather than love. I didn't choose the safe path because it called to me. I chose it because I was too scared to try the thing that really called to me. And that's the difference? Rebecca asked. That's everything, Dorothy said. Life is going to be hard either way. You might as well be miserable doing something you care about than something you don't. Rebecca laughed despite herself. That's a pretty dark way to look at it. Maybe, but it's honest. Dorothy leaned forward, her expression serious. Rebecca, I'm 73. I had a heart attack. The doctors say I'm doing well, but we both know I don't have forever. And I'll tell you what I've learned. The things you regret most aren't the things you tried and failed at. They're the things you never tried at all. After she left Dorothy's that day, Rebecca did something she'd never done before. She went to a bookstore and bought a book about art therapy. She didn't even know why exactly. She'd heard Dorothy mention it once, how some artists worked in hospitals and care homes using art to help people heal. That night, she started reading, and something clicked. This was it. This was what had been missing. She didn't just want to make art for herself. She wanted to use it to help people the way Dorothy had helped her. She wanted to give other people that feeling of being seen and heard and alive. By Monday morning, she'd done hours of research. There were master's programs in art therapy, programs that would teach her how to combine psychology with creative expression, programs that would let her turn this thing she loved into a career that mattered. But the practical side of her brain kicked in immediately. These programs cost money, a lot of money. She'd have to quit her job, take on student loans, and start completely over at 32 years old. Most people were settling into their careers at this point, not throwing them away to chase some dream. She made a spreadsheet. Because of course she did. Income versus expenses, loan amounts versus future salary projections, best case scenarios and worst case scenarios. The numbers didn't look great. She'd be broke for at least 2 years. She'd have to move to a smaller apartment, give up her savings, all for something that might not even work out. The smart choice was obvious. Keep her job. Keep painting as a hobby. Maybe that could be enough. But every day at work felt harder after that. She'd be in meetings and find herself doodling in the margins of her notebook. She'd be reviewing financial statements and thinking about color theory. She'd be eating lunch at her desk and wondering what Dorothy was doing. If she was painting something beautiful while Rebecca wasted another day pretending to care about profit margins. Her friend Lisa noticed something was off. They were getting coffee one afternoon when Lisa asked, "Okay, what's going on with you?" "You've been weird for weeks," Rebecca hesitated. Then, because she needed to tell someone, she explained everything. The painting, Dorothy, the art therapy programs, the impossible decision she was facing. Lisa listened quietly, stirring her coffee. When Rebecca finished, she expected Lisa to tell her she was being ridiculous, that she couldn't throw away her career for some middle-aged crisis fantasy. Instead, Lisa said, "Do it." "What?" "Do it. Quit your job. Go to school. Follow the thing that's making your eyes light up for the first time since I've known you." "But it's crazy," Rebecca protested. "I'd be starting over. I'd be broke. What if I fail? And what if you don't?" Lisa shot back. "Rebecca, I've worked with you for 3 years. You're good at your job, but you hate it. I can see it on your face every single day. And lately, since you started this painting thing, you've been different. Happier, more alive. Why would you choose to be miserable just because it's safe?" Rebecca felt tears pricking her eyes. "Because I'm scared." "Of course you're scared. Change is scary. But you know what else is scary? Waking up in 20 years and realizing you wasted your life being too afraid to try." That night, Rebecca pulled out the application for the art therapy program she'd been looking at. It was based in the city, so she wouldn't even have to move. She stared at the blank forms for an hour, her cursor hovering over the fields. Finally, she started typing. The next Saturday, she told Dorothy what she was doing. Dorothy's face lit up in a way Rebecca had never seen before. "You're really doing it?" Dorothy asked, her voice thick with emotion. "I don't know," Rebecca admitted. "I'm applying. But actually going through with it? Actually quitting my job? I keep chickening out every time I think about it." Dorothy was quiet for a moment. Then she got up, moving slowly to her bookshelf. She pulled out an old photo album and brought it back to the couch. "I want to show you something," she said, flipping through the pages. She stopped on a photograph of a young woman standing in front of an easel. The woman was probably in her 30s with dark hair pulled back, paint on her clothes, and the biggest smile on her face. "Is that you?" Rebecca asked. "That's me at 34. A student took this photo during one of my classes. I'd just finished teaching them about Impressionism, and I was so happy that day. Teaching made me happy." She turned a few more pages and pointed to another photo. This one showed the same woman, older now, standing in what looked like an art gallery. But the smile was different, sadder, more wistful. This was 10 years later. A friend of mine had an art show. She'd taken the risk I was too afraid to take, and it paid off. She was a working artist. And I was so happy for her, but I was also heartbroken. Dorothy closed the album. I spent the next 30 years telling myself I'd made the right choice. And maybe I did. But Rebecca, I need you to understand something. That younger me, the one in that first photo, she still believed anything was possible. The older me in that second photo had stopped believing. And once you stop believing, it's very hard to get that back. You're saying I should believe? Rebecca asked. I'm saying you already do believe. You wouldn't be applying to these programs if you didn't. You wouldn't be this torn up inside if you didn't. The belief is there. You're just letting fear drown it out. Rebecca spent the next 2 weeks in agony. She sent in her application. She told her parents what she was considering, and they reacted exactly how she expected. Concern, confusion, gentle suggestions that maybe she should think about this more carefully. At work, her boss asked her to take on a new project, one that would mean a promotion and a raise. A year ago, she would have been thrilled. Now all she could think about was how this would make it even harder to leave. She said yes anyway, because that's what you did, right? You took the opportunities in front of you. But that night, she had a dream. She was standing in front of a giant painting, working on it with complete focus and joy. Then someone called her name, and she turned around to find herself sitting at a desk in a gray office. The painting was gone. She'd just imagined it. She woke up with tears on her face. The acceptance letter came on a Tuesday. Rebecca stared at it for 20 minutes, her hands shaking. She'd gotten in. They wanted her. They saw potential in her portfolio, in her essay about wanting to use art to heal people. This was real. This wasn't just a fantasy anymore. This was an actual choice she had to make. She called Dorothy. I got in, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Oh, Rebecca, that's wonderful. I don't know if I can do it, Rebecca admitted. Everyone thinks I'm crazy. My parents are upset. My boss just offered me a promotion. The logical choice is to stay. Dorothy was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was gentle but firm. Can I tell you one last thing? Then I'll stop pushing, I promise. Okay. When my husband died, I had this moment of clarity. I realized that all the things I'd worried about in life, all the fears that had held me back, they all seemed so silly in the face of real loss. I wished I'd been braver. I wished I'd cared less about what other people thought and more about what made me feel alive. She paused. You get one life, Rebecca. One, and it goes by faster than you can possibly imagine. Don't waste yours living someone else's version of what success should look like. Rebecca hung up and sat in silence. One life. That's all any of them got. She opened her laptop and started typing. Rebecca typed and deleted the resignation letter 5 times before she finally just wrote it straight through without stopping to think. If she thought too much, she'd talk herself out of it. Again. Dear Mr. Patterson, I'm writing to inform you of my resignation from my position as senior accountant, effective 2 weeks from today. Her finger hovered over the send button for what felt like hours. This was it, the moment that would change everything. Once she hit send, there was no going back. No pretending she was just exploring options. This would be real. She thought about Dorothy, about that photo of the younger woman who still believed anything was possible, about waking up at 73 with regrets. She hit send. The next 2 weeks were surreal. Her boss tried to convince her to stay, offering more money, better projects, anything to change her mind. Her colleagues looked at her like she'd lost her mind. Who quit a stable job in this economy to become a student again? Lisa was the only one who got it. I'm proud of you, she said on Rebecca's last day. You're doing something most people only dream about. You're actually being brave. Rebecca didn't feel brave. She felt terrified. The weekend before her program started, Rebecca went to Dorothy's apartment. She brought flowers and Dorothy's favorite pastries from the bakery down the street. But when Dorothy opened the door, Rebecca could see she'd gotten weaker. Moving was harder. Her breathing was more labored. Don't look at me like that, Dorothy said, catching Rebecca's expression. I'm fine. Just getting older, that's all. They settled in the living room and Rebecca told her everything. How she'd quit. How scared she was. How everyone thought she was making a huge mistake. And what do you think? Dorothy asked. Rebecca thought about it. I think I'm more scared of not trying than I am of failing. Dorothy smiled, and for a moment she looked younger, lighter. Then you're exactly where you need to be. As summer faded into fall, Rebecca started her program. The first few weeks were overwhelming. She was older than most of her classmates. They talked about art theory and psychology with a confidence she didn't have. She'd lie awake at night wondering if she'd made a terrible mistake. The coursework was intense. Learning about trauma, mental health, therapeutic techniques, understanding how art could reach parts of people that talk therapy couldn't, how color and form and the physical act of creation could help people process things they didn't have words for. And then there was the financial stress. Rebecca had moved to a smaller apartment. She'd sold her car. Every dollar counted now. She worked part-time at a coffee shop to help cover rent, which meant even less sleep and more stress. There were moments she questioned everything. Standing in her tiny apartment at 2 a.m, exhausted from a shift at the coffee shop and still having reading to do for class, she'd wonder if she'd been insane to give up her comfortable life. But then she'd go to Dorothy's apartment on Saturdays, and something would shift. Dorothy was getting frailer week by week, but her spirit was as strong as ever. She wanted to hear everything about Rebecca's classes. She'd offer insights from her years of teaching art. She'd remind Rebecca why this mattered. "You're not just learning a profession," Dorothy said one afternoon. "You're learning how to help people find themselves again. That's sacred work." One particularly hard week after Rebecca failed a major exam, she showed up at Dorothy's apartment in tears. "I can't do this," she sobbed. "I'm too old. I'm not smart enough. I should have just stayed at my job." Dorothy let her cry. Then she made tea and sat down beside her. "Tell me about one moment in your classes when you felt it was worth it," Rebecca thought. "Last week we did an exercise where we had to paint our emotions without any planning. Just pure feeling on canvas, and for those 30 minutes I forgot about everything else. All the stress and fear and doubt. I was just present, just alive. And afterward, looking at what I'd created, I understood something about myself I'd never seen before. And that's what you're going to give other people," Dorothy said. "That moment of pure presence. That understanding. Would you trade that away just because it's hard right now?" Rebecca wiped her eyes. "No, I wouldn't." As fall turned to winter, Rebecca started her practicum work at a local hospital. This was the part that made everything real. Actual patients. People dealing with trauma, illness, grief. People who needed what she was learning to offer. Her first patient was a woman in her 50s recovering from a stroke. The woman couldn't speak clearly anymore, and the frustration of it was eating her alive. Rebecca was nervous, unsure if she could really help. She set up simple materials. Just paper and colored pencils. Nothing fancy. She sat with the woman and suggested she try drawing how she felt. The woman looked at her like she was crazy at first. But slowly, hesitantly, she picked up a red pencil. What came out was powerful. Angry slashes of red and black. Chaotic and painful and honest. When she finished, the woman was crying. But she was also nodding, pointing at the drawing like it had said something she couldn't put into words. Rebecca felt something shift in her chest. This was it. This was why she'd upended her entire life. Over the next few months, she worked with different patients. A teenage boy who'd tried to take his own life. An elderly man with dementia who came alive when he painted flowers. A young mother dealing with postpartum depression who found relief in creating abstract art. Each session taught Rebecca something new. About pain, about healing, about the incredible resilience of the human spirit. It was exhausting work. Emotionally draining. But it was also the most meaningful thing she'd ever done. Through it all, Dorothy was her anchor. Every Saturday, no matter how tired Rebecca was, she made time to visit. They'd paint together less now. Dorothy didn't have the energy, but they'd sit and talk, and Dorothy would share wisdom from her decades of life. One Saturday in March, Rebecca arrived to find Dorothy in bed. She looked so small under the blankets, so fragile. Rebecca's heart clenched with fear. "Hey," Dorothy said weakly, "don't look so worried. I'm tougher than I look." But they both knew the truth. Dorothy's heart was failing. The doctors had said it could be any time now. Rebecca sat beside the bed and took Dorothy's hand. "I need to thank you," she said, her voice thick. "For everything. For being the reason I found my way. For showing me it's never too late to become who you're meant to be." Dorothy squeezed her hand. "You thanked me the moment you sat down next to me in that train station. Everything after that has been a gift." "I'm scared," Rebecca admitted, "of losing you. Of doing this work without you to talk to about it." "You won't lose me," Dorothy said. Every time you help someone find their voice through art, I'll be there. Every time you encourage someone to be brave, I'll be there. That's how we live on, through the ripples we create in other people's lives. They sat in silence for a while, Rebecca holding Dorothy's hand, both of them understanding that time was running out. "Can I tell you something?" Dorothy said finally. "These past months, watching you take this leap, seeing you struggle and doubt and keep going anyway, it's been one of the greatest joys of my life. You gave me something precious in my final year. You gave me hope that the world still has people who choose courage over comfort." Rebecca felt tears sliding down her face. "You saved my life. You know that, right? I was dying in that old life, and I didn't even know it. You woke me up." "No," Dorothy said gently. "You saved your own life. I just held up a mirror so you could see who you really were." That spring, Rebecca finished her program. She graduated with honors. Her thesis focused on using art therapy with heart patients inspired by Dorothy's journey. Dorothy was too weak to attend the ceremony, but Rebecca brought her graduation cap to the apartment afterward. "Look at you," Dorothy said, her eyes shining with tears. "My brilliant friend. The world needs what you have to offer." Rebecca had already accepted a position at the hospital where she'd done her practicum. She'd be starting full-time in the summer, working with patients across different units. The pay wasn't great, nothing like what she'd made as an accountant. But when she thought about going to work every day, she felt excitement instead of dread, purpose instead of emptiness. "I couldn't have done this without you," Rebecca said. "Yes, you could have," Dorothy replied, "but I'm glad you didn't have to." On a quiet Tuesday in May, Rebecca got the call she'd been dreading. Dorothy had passed away peacefully in her sleep. Rebecca sat on her apartment floor and cried for an hour. Grief and gratitude all mixed together. The funeral was small. Dorothy's children flew in from across the country. A handful of former students showed up, now middle-aged adults who still remembered the art teacher who'd changed their lives. Rebecca spoke about how Dorothy had saved her when she didn't even know she needed saving, about how one act of kindness in a train station had led to a friendship that transformed everything, about how Dorothy had taught her that it's never too late to choose courage. Afterward, Dorothy's daughter approached her. "Mom talked about you constantly," she said. "She said you reminded her of herself when she was young. She also left something for you." A week later, Rebecca received a letter from Dorothy's lawyer. She sat in her apartment, hands shaking as she opened it. Inside was a letter in Dorothy's handwriting written months before she died. And a check for $50,000. Rebecca's hands trembled as she read Dorothy's letter. The handwriting was shaky, written during those final weeks when even holding a pen had become difficult. "My dear Rebecca," it began. "If you're reading this, I'm gone. Don't be sad. I lived a long life and you made the last year of it more meaningful than I could have imagined. Remember that February evening when you stopped to help a crying old woman in a train station? Everyone else rushed past, but you stopped. You saw me. You cared. That moment changed both of our lives. I've thought a lot about what to leave you. I don't have much. My children are taken care of and most of my possessions are just memories gathering dust. But I have savings, money I've been setting aside for years without really knowing what for. Now I know. It was for you. This check is for $50,000. It's my life savings. Before you protest or feel guilty, let me explain. You gave me purpose in my final year. Every Saturday I'd wake up excited knowing you were coming. Watching you find your courage, seeing you become who you were meant to be. It healed something in me. It let me feel like maybe and fears and regrets could lead to something good through you. Use this money to keep going. Pay off your student loans. Give yourself breathing room as you start this new career. But more than that, I want you to use it to help others find what we found together. Don't let financial fear stop you from reaching people who need what you have to offer. You told me once that I saved your life. But Rebecca, you saved mine too. You reminded me that kindness still exists. That connection still matters. That stopping to help a stranger can change the entire world. Keep painting. Keep helping people find their voices. And remember, every time you do, I'm there with you. With all my love, Dorothy." Rebecca read the letter 3 times, tears streaming down her face. $50,000. Dorothy had given her everything she had. The grief hit her in waves over the following weeks. She'd catch herself thinking she needed to tell Dorothy something, then remember she couldn't. She'd walk past Dorothy's apartment building and have to force herself not to go up to knock on the door. The world felt emptier without her friend in it. But along with the grief came something else. A sense of responsibility. Dorothy had invested everything in her, not just money but hope and belief. Rebecca couldn't let that go to waste. She used part of the money to pay off her student loans. The relief of not having that debt hanging over her was immediate. She could breathe easier, make choices based on what mattered rather than what paid the most. But the rest of the money, she knew exactly what to do with it. Rebecca started researching what it would take to create a foundation, a nonprofit that would provide free art therapy to people who couldn't afford it, underserved communities, low-income families, people in hospitals without insurance, anyone who needed healing but didn't have access to it. It took months of planning, paperwork and lawyers and applications for nonprofit status. Rebecca worked on it every spare moment she had in between her shifts at the hospital. Some days the bureaucracy felt overwhelming, but she'd think about Dorothy, about that letter, about the responsibility she'd been given, and she'd keep going. She decided to call it Dorothy's Hope Foundation. When the approval finally came through, Rebecca sat in her apartment and cried. It was real. Dorothy's legacy would live on. The foundation started small. Rebecca ran sessions on weekends at a community center in a low-income neighborhood. She brought all the supplies herself, set up in a small room with flickering lights, and waited to see if anyone would come. The first day, 3 people showed up. A single mother with 2 kids, an older man who'd lost his job and his home, a teenage girl who looked like she carried the weight of the world. Rebecca set out paper and paints and pencils and just let them create. No rules, no judgment, just space to express whatever they needed to express. The single mother painted a garden. She said she used to have one before life got hard and she missed it. The older man drew his childhood home with surprising detail. The teenage girl made abstract swirls of dark colors that gradually got lighter toward the edges. Afterward, the mother hugged Rebecca with tears in her eyes. I forgot I could still feel peaceful, she whispered. Word spread. The next week, 8 people came, then 15, then 20. Rebecca had to find a bigger space. She recruited other art therapy students to volunteer. She applied for grants to buy more supplies. At her job at the hospital, Rebecca worked with patients of all kinds. Heart patients like Dorothy had been, cancer patients scared and angry, and looking for any way to process what they were going through, children who'd experienced trauma and couldn't talk about it but could draw it. There was an 8-year-old boy who'd witnessed violence at home. He wouldn't speak to the therapists or social workers, but when Rebecca gave him clay, he started forming shapes. Gradually, through those shapes, he began to tell his story. Not with words, but with his hands, with form and texture and the physical act of creation. There was a woman in her 60s who'd had a massive stroke. Like Rebecca's first patient, she'd lost her ability to speak clearly. The frustration was destroying her, but when she painted, something shifted. She could communicate again, not with words but with color and movement and emotion. Her family cried when they saw what she created. They could see her in there, still fighting, still present. Each person Rebecca helped, she thought about Dorothy. About how one woman's wisdom and courage had set all of this in motion. About how stopping to help a stranger in a train station had created ripples that just kept spreading. A year after Dorothy's death, Rebecca organized a memorial art show. She reached out to Dorothy's former students, many of whom were now artists and teachers themselves. She displayed some of Dorothy's own paintings, pieces that her children had agreed to lend, and she invited everyone who'd been touched by Dorothy's Hope Foundation to contribute their own work. The community center was packed. Over 100 people came. Former students shared stories about how Dorothy had seen potential in them when no one else did. Foundation participants talked about how art had helped them heal. Dorothy's children stood in front of their mother's paintings and cried, seeing how many lives she'd touched. Rebecca stood in the middle of it all, surrounded by color and creativity and connection, and felt Dorothy's presence so strongly it took her breath away. This was the legacy. Not just the paintings on the walls, but the people. The living, breathing people who'd been changed by art and kindness and the belief that they mattered. 2 years after starting the foundation, Rebecca was able to hire 2 part-time staff members. 3 years in, they were serving over 300 people a month across 5 locations. Other cities started reaching out, asking how to replicate the model. Rebecca still worked at the hospital, but she spent every spare moment growing Dorothy's hope. Every grant she wrote, every volunteer she trained, every person she helped find their voice through art. It all felt like honoring the woman who'd changed her life. On the 4th anniversary of the day she'd met Dorothy in that train station, Rebecca went back to that same bench. She sat there for a long time, watching commuters rush past, everyone in their own world. She thought about how she'd almost kept walking that day, how easy it would have been to ignore a crying stranger and get on with her life. If she had, everything would be different. She'd probably still be an accountant, miserable and lost. Dorothy would have gone home alone that night, maybe never connecting with anyone in her final years. None of this would exist, but she had stopped. And that single choice had changed everything. Rebecca pulled out her phone and opened her photos. She scrolled to a picture someone had taken at the art show. Dozens of people standing in front of Dorothy's paintings, smiling, connected, alive. This was what hope looked like. This was what happened when you chose to see people, to care, to believe that one person could make a difference. A woman sat down on the bench next to Rebecca. She was young, maybe mid-20s, and she was crying quietly. Rebecca watched as people walked past without looking. Everyone in such a hurry. Everyone wrapped up in their own struggles. Rebecca took a breath. Then she turned to the woman. "Are you okay? Can I help you with something?" The woman looked up, surprised. I'm sorry. I'm fine. You don't need to worry about me." "Maybe," Rebecca said gently, "but I'd like to if that's okay." And as the woman began to talk, hesitantly at first, Rebecca felt Dorothy with her, felt the presence of every person who'd ever stopped to help a stranger, felt the power of human connection that kept rippling out and out, touching lives in ways you could never predict. She didn't know where this conversation would lead. Maybe nowhere. Maybe just this one moment of kindness. Or maybe, just maybe, this was another beginning, another chance to offer hope, another opportunity to remind someone that they mattered, that they were seen, that they weren't alone. Because that's what Dorothy had taught her. That we save each other. That kindness isn't just nice, it's essential. That the smallest gesture at the right moment can change the entire trajectory of a life. The woman was still talking, and Rebecca listened. Really listened. The way someone had once listened to her. The way Dorothy had seen her not as she was, but as she could be. And in that moment, sitting on that bench where it all began, Rebecca understood something profound. She thought Dorothy had saved her. But maybe the truth was bigger than that. Maybe they'd saved each other. Maybe that's how it always works. We're all just strangers on benches waiting for someone to stop and see us, waiting for someone to offer hope. And when we receive that gift, we pass it on. Again and again and again. An endless ripple of connection and courage and love. That was Dorothy's real legacy. Not the paintings or the foundation or the money. It was this. The reminder that we're all connected. That every person we meet is a chance to change the world. Rebecca smiled through her tears. "Thank you, Dorothy," she thought, "for stopping my world long enough to help me see what really mattered, for teaching me that it's never too late, for showing me that hope isn't something we find, it's something we give." The woman beside her had stopped crying. She was breathing easier now, looking less alone. Rebecca gave her a tissue and her phone number. "Call me if you need anything," she said. "I mean it, anything at all."